It's been 2 months since the whole world faced a global catastrophe that changed beyond recognition the usual life of people. The liberation team of brave students was on the threshold of the 5th dungeon, and they were preparing to take an important step for the entire humanity. The new heroes of the changed world were excited and enthusiastic. But in the depths of the sinister dungeon, a dangerous rival awaited them, eager to meet the liberation team. Waiting for the heroes, Guy promised to first become the most powerful demon king in this world, and then find true freedom. Shortly before the terrible events, the world lived an ordinary life and people were only worried about pressing problems. Some were eager to change jobs, and some were waiting for the weekend to enjoy a flavorful barbecue. But a guy of 18 years old, Kurosaki Shin, successfully entered college and became a freshman. The 2 beautiful female freshman students thought their new classmate was very strange, because Shin didn't talk much with anyone and even ate lunch always alone. The guy really avoided socializing and thought that these girls would easily find new friends in addition to their classes, and he would rather be alone. Shin realized that in order to have friends in college, he just needed to socialize, and in that case, maybe in the future he should still attend a lecture on friendship skills. Although there was no denying that this world was too unfair. The signal of the smartphone distracted Shin from thinking, and the guy was surprised to hear the signal of an incoming message, because he thought that his gadget was on silent mode. Before he could read the message, Shin heard a variety of different melodies that merged into one continuous noise. As it turned out, all the people, and not only in this city or in this country, had received incoming messages at the same time. Some people did not pay much attention to such a mass mailing, but there were also those who were very surprised. The most surprising thing was that the message appeared to be exactly the same to everyone and announced the beginning of a project called World Salvation. The first message was followed by others with very strange content. People were informed about the need to save the world from some kind of tension, and for this purpose, it would be necessary to wipe out some people from this planet. The messages also stated that all humans must remain neutral from now on. Then came the mandatory offer to answer some questions within 24 hours. Once the completed survey was sent, it would take 3 hours to process and validate the data received. The last message asked to start the survey and to click the appropriate button. This was again duplicated with a reminder that the survey time is only 1 day. Shin did not take all the messages he received seriously, and only thought that there would be idiots in the world who would fall for such a stupid prank. After all, it was obviously just a prank and should be understood. Many people took the strange messages in the same way as Shin and decided that there was no reason to worry. Nevertheless, the whole thing caused serious discussion among the students, who even in class continued to share their feelings about the messages they received. Shin was looking forward to finishing his studies, and the first thing he did was return home to be alone. Feeling more tired than usual, because all this fuss over the World Salvation Project was really irritating, Shin decided to read the latest news and was incredibly surprised when the top headlines on the search engine had information about all these silly reports. Shin was interested in such hype and decided to find out as much information as possible about this problem. It turned out that the world was in chaos because of the mysterious messages, and all the popular chat rooms were completely devoted to the topic of world salvation. Shin decided to familiarize himself with the questions that were proposed in the mysterious messages, and the first choice was between chaos and law. There was a warning that if one did not make any choice, one would remain neutral. But if one did the right thing, there was joining the law. Shin didn't look too deep for specific information, because there simply wasn't any and people had no idea what they were facing. Shin was angry with himself because all his thoughts were related to the stupid event. After all, this whole thing shouldn't have swayed at all. To calm down, the young boy decided to distract himself and take a relaxing shower. Meanwhile, darkness had already fallen over the city, and Shin decided to watch TV after his shower. An excited anchor on one of the main channels was reporting on the situation due to the reports received around the world. At the same time, the TV anchor was urging the people of the country to take the survey as soon as possible and send it in for processing. Shin felt his irritation flaring up again and decided that he didn't want to listen to this. But the other channels were doing the same thing, with the only exception being the change of anchor. In the student settlement, almost no one slept and everyone was excited about the news. After all, if such a thing is talked about on the central television, it is not just a prank. The program of TV broadcasting did not change, and the presenter was constantly calling in different languages for the whole population of the planet to take a poll and choose their side, because the World Salvation Project would soon start. The announcer urged to spread this information among the people and asked not to postpone the important survey. Shin decided to search for information online again and opened a search engine window. Absolutely, the entire information field was occupied with the single topic of world salvation. Shin was horrified at how crazy it had gotten and nervously shuddered at the next message on his smartphone. Shin, as well as many other people, were shocked at what was happening and didn't understand what was even going on. The frightened female students learned from the new message that if they did not pass the test, they would be hacked and they would not be able to do anything with their device in the future. The girls were excited and decided that their cases were really bad. Therefore, they would have to take this strange test after all. The young female students agreed to take the test together so it wouldn't be so scary. Many people were affected by this warning, and the process of taking the survey accelerated. Shin kept trying to ignore the messages and decided that whoever was sending the messages had better not spam his email. The panic and fear was masterfully maintained by the threatening speeches of the televangelist. The man on the screen warned in a well-practiced voice that if a person did not take the survey and send the report, terrible things would happen to him. With each passing minute, Shin was more and more surprised. After all, public media should not incite panic and general hysteria. Shin did not understand at all why he was obliged to choose a side and what would happen if he remained neutral. Ignorance was annoying and more information was needed. Shin sincerely did not understand why he should take part in some strange event about which he knew nothing. Shin thought that in times like these, it would be nice to have a friend to talk to and decide exactly how to answer strange questions. Suddenly, the new message startled Shin and the guy cussed out, not expecting good news anymore. The message he received urged him not to hesitate to take the survey and warned him of the negative consequences of refusal. Shin resented the lack of any guide to detailed information and decided that it was unlikely that anything would change if he did take the stupid test. But in any case, one would have to rely solely on one's own eyes. Shin opened the test menu and learned that this survey was to find out a person's level of honesty, and therefore it was advisable to provide truthful information. At the same time, a special application started installing on the gadget and suggested that one follow the specified instructions. Shin wondered how it was even possible that a telephone survey should be taken by the entire population of the Earth. The first question required information about someone Shin wanted to protect in this world. Shin regretfully thought of his loved ones and decided that they were not worth considering. And since he didn't even have a girlfriend and was just an ordinary freshman student, he should only take care of himself. Shin confidently pressed the no button. In the end, it was necessary to give answers to questions on various subjects, of which there were 1,000. According to the results of the test, Shin was determined to be on the chaos side and learned that he would now be sent to the Divine Gate. Meanwhile, the mysterious girl watched what was happening in the world, for it was obvious that this was the beginning of the demise of humanity. Thanks to a special survey, at least half of the population would die, and many experiments had been conducted for this purpose. Everything will have a positive impact on the planet as a whole. And as the human population decreases, the climate and nature will change for the better. The inspired goddess rejoiced at the possibility of erasing people's lives with just one move. It was obvious that many people, despite all the warnings, would doom themselves, and that would make the task easier. And those not many who will be on the right side to receive a well-deserved reward. The chosen will go to the side of chaos, and she will become the king of demons and can wish everyone good luck in trying to save the world. Waking up in his room, Shin decided that he had had a stupid dream and everything was actually fine. The boy thought about it and tried to remember the recent events and try to understand what was a dream and what was reality. Shin remembered how all of humanity received a strange message with a mandatory survey. After that, he had taken this compatibility test, and the results showed that he had a strong predisposition to chaos. But what exactly happened then Shin didn't remember, and all his memories were abruptly cut short. Taking his phone in his hands, Shin felt a sharp pain and could not hold the gadget in his hands. The pain gradually subsided, and it was a very unpleasant surprise. Shin realized that he just wanted to know the latest news and picked up the phone. But it was like everything was in a fog, and it seemed that some important points had disappeared from consciousness. Cold sweat appeared on Shin's forehead as he realized that he couldn't remember who he really was. Gradually, the agitated student remembered his name, but all these memories did not inspire confidence. At the same time, Shin could not remember his last name, which of course every person should have. Also, Shin realized that he must have parents without whom one simply could not appear in the world. However, there were no memories related to close relatives. Shiro realized that he including could not remember all of his acquaintances, of which there were so many in school alone. The complete amnesia was terrifying, for not knowing who you were was a real ordeal for a person. Shin did not understand the reasons for the sudden amnesia. After all, he had not been in accidents and had not been sent. And if it was all really a nightmare, it would be time to wake up by now. But suddenly Shin remembered the words of a strange girl who said that anyone who gets to the chaos side would lose the memories of other people. This would allow them to worry about nothing and fight each other more effectively. At the same time, order people and neutral individuals would also have no memories of those who went to the side of chaos. Shin recalled how after taking the survey, he found himself in a mysterious place. At that moment, Shin heard the voice of an unfamiliar girl greeting everyone in the chaos space. It was then obvious that Shin was not the only one who had gotten into this place. At that, the mysterious lady explained that each guest would not be able to see her or the other chaos representatives, and so everyone would have to wait for their turn for a while. The girl imperiously exclaimed that she could see everyone and would leave no one without her attention. Shin decided that this lady could easily give lessons in arrogance. The girl then explained that she was only hosting the event and it didn't matter at all what her name was. So to begin with, everyone would find out exactly what had happened to them and what their role was in the worldwide salvation project. Shin couldn't understand how anyone could even show such love for chaos, especially since the word chaos didn't apply to ordinary life in any way. Meanwhile, the lady announced that all the supporters of chaos would be engaged in creating a new world, and since everyone loved freedom and chaos so much, they should set out to achieve this goal. Shin tried to think about his situation, but the lady's voice immediately asked him not to be distracted. It seemed that her ringing voice was not perceived by his ears, but was broadcast directly to his brain. The girl again began to explain that the World Salvation Project is a project that will divide all of humanity into supporters of order, chaos, and neutral people. In the future, all three factions would fight each other for total supremacy. But to be more precise, order and chaos will mainly fight. And the neutral people are those who completely ignored passing the original test and stayed outside the two main factions. Shin couldn't understand why he would even want to fight. But the girl continued her lecture and informed him that the familiar world would be completely destroyed in about 20 years. The girl advised to take this information seriously and start worrying. It was because of such a threat that the World Salvation Project was created. The girl explained that, first, the current world, or rather people, are completely useless and only wantonly destroy the planet. The girl indignantly blamed humans for the decreasing birth rate, which led to the prevalence of an overly aged and useless population. And mankind is also guilty of polluting the planet and deserves to be severely punished. The angry lady gazed at each member of the human race and asked why people lived in the world at all, and whether they really did not feel the impending danger. The all-knowing representative of chaos confessed her desire to watch the destruction of the world in peace. But since humans themselves had tried so long and hard to destroy the beautiful world around them, she decided to help just this one time. The lady from the Chaos world pointed out Shin's existing communication problems and explained that she was only trying to motivate humanity for the sake of future survival. The girl then asked if each of the people who heard her knew when in their lives a person tried the hardest. Shin didn't want to think too much about the difficult question and thought that the only place he tried hardest in his life was during exam preparation. The guide to the world of chaos received quite a few stupid answers such as love, work study, and similar nonsense, and so she decided that there were a lot of idiots among the selected people. Lady Chaos then explained that humans are certainly beautiful creatures in their own way, and that is because they develop best during battle, and it is war that is the main catalyst for their abilities. Shin remembered that he had once heard that technology developed much faster during war. Meanwhile, the bossy girl continued to list all the flaws of humans and called them actually helpless creatures. And this beautiful world is perishing just because people have no motivation. And the best way for humanity to get out of this situation is to acquire real motivation for future struggles. That is the main objective of the World Salvation Project. It is for this purpose that all memories of acquaintances have been erased from the new representatives of chaos, except for themselves. By the same principle, the memories of the people of order and neutral people were erased. Shin didn't like this, because he didn't want to belong to any faction, and even more so tomorrow. Fighting with strangers was absolutely unthinkable. But the Chaos Knowledge Guide exclaimed that it was very simple and one should just kill those who would attack. Shin wasn't happy at the thought of someone attacking him, since he usually never even fought with anyone in his life. Then the lady remembered the important information and said that the people from the Chaos faction would not ally with each other, but should fight the same as those from the Order faction. Shin was completely confused at such an illogical situation. After all, if they were on the same side, then why the infighting? The girl continued to broadcast and regretfully stated that only a small number of people have a tendency to chaos, about 0.2 of the entire population of the planet. As it turned out, this is why the self-confident chaos conductor began by explaining the whole point of the Great Salvation Project. The girl stated that she had made all the chosen ones more powerful than the rest of the people from the other factions. Because of this, every Chaos supporter could become a Demon King and create subordinates for themselves. Shin was interested in this prospect, for such a spectacular title seemed like something exciting. As it turned out, the mysterious girl had optimized and improved the smartphones of all the Chaos people so that everyone would be able to use them during battle. Also, Lady Chaos reminded of the impossibility of abandoning a new role, and everyone now serves their true purpose. After completing the improvement of smartphones, the bossy girl wished everyone good luck in saving the world and proclaimed a new era of humanity. Realizing exactly what had happened to him, Shin walked out onto the deserted street. The rule of the new world was that there should only be one demon lord in each territory. The Chaos Guide had personally taken care of this and allocated each Chaos Lord his own grounds. Once in the deserted quarter of the city and completely immersed in the ominous silence, Shin finally realized that all of this was not a dream, but a terrible reality. The flood of thoughts caused irritation and nervous laughter, so Shin decided to go home. A map app appeared on the optimized smartphone, showing the area Shin controlled. The current location of the owner of the gadget himself was also indicated, and Shin looked with surprise at the layout of his dwelling. Shin then turned his attention to his refrigerator and remembered feeling hungry. But the newly appeared message to check his status made him put off exploring the refrigerator for later. The status menu indicated that Shin now belonged to the race of Demon Kings, also listed parameters such as strength, mana, knowledge, creatures, and alchemy. Such information reminded Shin of some game statistics and made him wonder if he was now no longer human. To begin, the status app offered to spend available points to enhance his abilities. Next, you had to create your domain and equip it to your liking, and finally, you had to create subordinates to protect your domain. All of these were basic steps to begin defending the world and surviving the brutal battles. Shin became interested in an option called Special, and it turned out that this feature could answer any question. Everything seemed too trivial, and Shin thought about using such a feature later. But it turned out that it was impossible to do so now, for the cancel button had simply disappeared, and now Shin began to think chaotically about what question to ask. To begin with, Shin decided to find out about the Worldwide Rescue Project, but in the end, he realized that he wouldn't learn anything new beyond what the girl organizer had told him. It was also foolish to ask his real last name, because this information would have no effect on his current situation. Therefore, it was impossible to waste his question. Lion decided to add up all the information he knew. It was clear that he was now the Demon King, and he first needed to create subordinates for himself in order to become stronger. Then he must defeat the supporters of order who would surely attack him and other supporters of chaos. And in the process of all this, one should maximize his efforts to expand his domain, or in other words, clan. Shin was interested in the very term kin that the girl organizer kept mentioning during the introduction, and it would be good to find out the details. Shin guessed that most likely only clan members could take over new territory. The former student's gaze was once again attracted by the snow-white refrigerator, and at that moment, the right question was born in his mind. Shin quickly formulated his interest and asked whether the Demon King or his subordinates could leave his clan. It didn't take long for the answer to come, and it turned out that under certain circumstances, it was indeed possible if the Demon King himself was raised in level. Also, subordinates under certain circumstances can leave their original clan. Shin decided for himself that he now knew in which direction he should go. All that remained was to find out what conditions would allow him to leave his clan. A pleasant surprise was the bonus of 10 extra experience points that the system provided for an excellent question. This bonus pleased Shin, for he had now completed his familiarization with the basic mechanics of the system, and in doing so had received a gift. Shin to begin with decided to deal with the distribution of experience points. There were a total of 5 available attributes for possible improvement: physical strength, mana, knowledge, crafting, and alchemy. Shin realized that all of his stats were at the lowest E level, but it was gratifying to have an extra 10 improvement points gained as a bonus. The increased number of points available was going to be a significant advantage over his competitors, and it also improved Shin's mood. To allocate points, all he had to do was touch the screen opposite the desired score, and Shin decided to do as he had previously planned. On the first touch, nothing happened, and the fact that the response was slowing down was starting to get very annoying. Although Shin realized that if he started pressing the screen harder, he would break his smartphone. But suddenly, the unbelievable happened. The phone reacted to all of Shin's taps with great delay, and this greatly reduced the number of available points. There were only 3 points left on the available score, and this caused a storm of emotion in the guy. But no matter how much Shin tried to find a way to get his score back, he couldn't do anything. There was simply no button in this menu that could undo the actions performed. Shin called himself an idiot, because with his stupid actions, he had achieved a completely different result than what he wanted. Shilo decided to cool down a bit, but what he saw in the refrigerator gave him a shock. The strange object was in the place where drinks and food should have been. Shin couldn't understand what exactly he had discovered in the refrigerator, and it only made him more annoyed. Before he knew it, Shin heard the familiar ringing of the phone and hurried to read the new message. The system was asking if Shin wanted to move the Zukariot from the installation point. It turned out that the ball found in the refrigerator was the Zukariot, the core of the Demon King's territory. The system warned that if the core was stolen by another Demon King, control of the domain would be lost. Shin wondered what would happen to him in case someone was able to rob it, and whether he would then simply die. Shin could not understand why such an important item was in his freezer, and whether the core could melt at room temperature, and whether it really needed to be frozen. From Shin's constant thinking and not understanding everything going on around him, Shin was very tired. Falling on the bed, the Demon King sincerely wished to escape from reality. In his heart, Shin of course realized that the problem would not go away with time. And if the girl organizer was to be believed, he only had 1 month to prepare. Gathering his strength, Shin got ready to solve the problem of how to distribute the improvement points. Shin remembered how he had started to pump up the alchemy index and assumed that all his touches had really worked, because now alchemy was at level B. Shin tried to remember exactly how many times he had touched the screen improving the skill, and realized that 2 touches had increased the level from E to D. Then it took 5 improvement points to raise the value from D to C. And then most likely, if you do some simple calculations, it took 10 improvement points to improve from level C to B. And that was the most expensive investment. Shin was saddened by such conclusions, and if he had known about everything, he certainly would have done things differently. Shin found out that alchemy affects the creation of items. The creation parameter affects the creation of a domain as well as the creation of subordinates. Shin also learned that by any means necessary to become stronger, for strength was necessary to survive in this new world. It became obvious that it was impossible to prepare well enough in just 1 month and needed to raise his level. In this transformed world, the concept of levels was born. And the only thing that could raise a level was defeating an enemy. And at this point, the enemies were the same people from the Order faction. Shin asked himself an important question, because the level also refers to the people of Order. And based on that, a list of important things should be prepared. It became obvious that it was important to ride the opponents before they leveled up and earn experience points. It wasn't a bad advantage that only Chaos people gain experience, even if not the Demon King, but his subordinates defeat the opponent. That said, Shin remembered how the girl organizer was indifferent to people of neutral status and was the least known about them. It turns out that there are 2 possible ways to ride the people of Order. The first option is for the one who starts it to win. And in a month's time, the Order faction will know the truth. And while they are confused, you can attack them from all sides. The second option is to destroy the Order's people the moment they invade their territory. Shin now felt that he had no feelings. The meaning of the words love, gratitude, kindness, and many other things remain clear, but now there is no one to feel these feelings for, because Shin has completely forgotten everyone for whom one can feel feelings. The first method of victory is more likely to lead to success. And if attacked on the first day, the opponents will be weak Order opponents with the first level. The effect of surprise would be a major advantage during the battle and would add to the chances of success. But at the same time, one shouldn't forget the words of the girl organizer. The guide to the world of chaos repeatedly reminded of the importance of strengthening the territory and defense. And it would also be important to seize the territory controlled by other demon kings. It was also mentioned that only a pod could be in the territory of the domain. Shin didn't quite understand the full meaning of this, and it was still a mystery whether he himself could kidnap an enemy Zukuriate, or only his subordinates could do so. Shin decided not to be tormented by doubts and asked this question in a special favor. And it turned out that indeed the Demon King and his subordinates can leave the territory of his domain, but this possibility appears as the level of the Demon King himself increases. Shin decided that it was unlikely that he could leave his territory at the moment, and in that case, the only way to raise his level at the moment was to defeat the men of Order who had invaded his territory, and that was a cause for concern. The thing was that at this moment, the population of the planet was 5 billion people, and the number of Demon Kings was only 1 million. It turned out that for one Demon King, there were approximately 5,000 likely opponents. Japan's population was 80 million, and according to last year's census in Kanazawa City, its population was 300,000. Judging from such calculations, there should be 60 Demon Kings in this city alone, which is quite a lot and promises a serious confrontation. It should also be considered that the territory of the city is just over 460 square kilometers, and this is not such a small area. It was certainly not known which domain the men of Order would attack first. After all, there were 60 options. Shin realized that if he was in the last numbers, his level would subsequently fall far behind that of his opponents. If things developed like this, defeat would be imminent. Therefore, one must maximize cunning to lure the men of Order into one's territory and be one of the first to be attacked. Shin tried to recall the plots of all the novels he knew, and there was no exact match of what was happening, but there were similar ones. Shin compared himself to some of the characters in the novels and realized that since he was a Demon King, his territory was a kind of dungeon that adventurers whose role was played by the men of Order sought to enter. The second important factor in such processes is treasure, which is in the so-called dungeon. Shin realized that if he spread rumors of some valuable treasure in the form of powerful weapons in his territory, perhaps the men of Order would flood into his domain. Shin realized that being a target was certainly a great disadvantage, but if one still couldn't avoid being attacked, it was better to meet with weaker opponents and raise his level at their expense. Especially if the people of Chaos were to fight each other in the future, one must become the strongest amongst them all. Shin decided that his improved alchemy ability would allow him to attract the people of Order and also allow him to improve his own equipment. In addition to that, one should take care of strengthening the defense of his territory by improving the creation parameter. Also, Shin realized that all other ambitions would be useless if he could not effectively fight the men of order. To do so, he had originally planned to improve his body's physical parameters, but alas, there was no way to get back the points he had accidentally spent. The system menu prompted him to create his own domain and design it based on his own preferences. Shin read the description of his domain and did not understand anything, except that its territory was 6 square kilometers and there was 1 Zukariot available at the moment. It all seemed too complicated for a newcomer, and Shin wouldn't mind a manual, or at least some guidance. Deciding that it would still be possible to customize his domain somehow later on, Shin was more concerned about the special effect called Pseudo World. That being said, there were 707 hours until the Lords of Order would learn of their role in the World Salvation Project. Thus, for the next 29 days, no one would be able to enter his domain. Shin studied the domain creation menu and found out that it was necessary to create weapons, create special restrictions, and the environment and objects of the domain itself could be changed. However, changing any parameter of the domain requires chaos points, which allow you to buy various modifications. Over time, spent points slowly regenerate, making it possible to purchase additional modifications. Scrolling through the menu some more, Shin found some interesting information. For those who could not decide on the parameters of the domain, offered a discount package for beginners. The cost of this package was 100 chaos points, and once selected, there was no way to refuse. This price seemed too high for Shin, because that was the number of available points he had at his disposal. It was obvious that chaos points would be needed to create subordinates and items. Although as promised, chaos points were supposed to regenerate over time. Shin decided to doubt his decisions as little as possible. After all, time was money, and so it was better to spend the points on an already completed customization package. After confirming the purchase, the surroundings began to change dramatically, and Shin watched the transformation with amazement. The selected set turned out to be a customization pack called Dungeon, and everything around him changed drastically. It seemed that everything in the original area was gone. The only thing left was the refrigerator, which unbeknownst to him continued to draw electricity and maintain a stable operation. Shin became convinced that the core of the territory really needed to be frozen. Next, the young demon king decided to check the status of his domain. In addition to the already known information, the parameter of domain points, available objects, and various installed weapons in the form of arrows, traps, and huge stones appeared. Shin decided that apparently the domain points determine the possible number of installed traps, weapons, and everything else. Currently, the maximum number of such points was 115. It looked as if the maximum limit of domain points would increase if one set up facilities favorable to invaders, such as special rest areas. Such a rest area added 10 domain points to the maximum. Lion determined that he had only 10 domain points at the beginning. Then the installation of 2 rest areas and other facilities resulted in 10 points. The remaining points were awarded for treasure chests. Shin decided that if he could set up the maximum number of rest areas, it would enable him to set up a huge number of traps. But since there were no chaos points available at the moment, it was an idea worth shelving for later. Shin decided to use the time waiting for the recovery of chaos points to check the options for creating subordinates and creating items. But after 2 hours of grueling study, Shin felt utterly confused. It turned out that the number of options in the item creation category was much higher than the subordinate creation category. This predominance was due to the advanced specialization of alchemist. But unfortunately, high-level weapons were worth 500 or more chaos points. It turned out that there was no point in pumping the alchemy skill specialization to level B because there was no way to buy weapons that opened. At this point, Shin had 20 points of chaos for every hour 10 points were restored. There were 705 hours until the end of the pseudo world, and from that, it turned out that 7,070 points could be fed before the invasion began. All this information made Shin feel drowned out and decided that it would be a good idea to write everything down. But all Shin could have of familiar items was a refrigerator and a smartphone. It was the smartphone that might have the Notes app that Shin tried to find. The various standard applications did work, and the same calculator could be useful for calculations. From the excitement, Shin had initially even forgotten that his smartphone could be a great assistant. The most surprising thing was that the phone was receiving a network signal, and it was possible to surf the internet. There were 6 hours left before the number of chaos points were fully restored, and Shin became interested in what was happening in the world. The situation was predictable. On every news site, all the talk was only about the abnormal situation. One could understand the panic of the people of the Order because of the so-called cataclysm. All over the world, impassable zones appeared. Often people had no access to their own homes, left only with smartphones in their hands. All of this caused mass unrest, and in some places riots. The government tried to organize protection for those people who remained homeless, but the forces and funds were clearly insufficient to fully solve the problem. Two girl student friends, Rina and Kairi, were able to find each other and had a little easier time together. Rina admitted that she was very worried about Kairi and was afraid that they would not be able to meet, because it was more difficult to go through problems alone. Impassable zones, areas that were impossible to access, covered most of the major cities of all countries. Many speculated that at this rate, all of humanity would soon be wiped out. Considering the size of Kanazawa City, the area of Shin's territory was 6 square kilometers, and the city itself had 60 demon kings. After simple calculations, it turns out that the impassable territory was 360 square kilometers, and the remaining area should fit the population of 300,000. This was a real challenge because the free space was about 100 square kilometers. Shin decided that when the people of the Order found out the truth about the World Salvation Project, they would be desperate to attack, although that was not his problem at all. In the time Shin had been reading the news, he had already recovered 50 chaos points, and it was time to think about the future again. Suddenly, the Unified World classes began, where the girl organizer promised to give a lecture on the basic rules of defending one's territory. Shin was surprised, for he was introduced as a king under the nickname of a loner. The girl reiterated the information that the territory of the Demon King and is a domain, and the round ball of Zukuriat is literally the core of the domain. It was also obvious that the population of the Demon King's territory at this moment only numbered himself. You can freely customize your domain using chaos points, which regenerate over time. At the same time, chaos points were needed not only to organize their territory, but also to create subordinates and items. Therefore, effectively working with chaos points, given their recovery time, is the first step to becoming the strongest Demon King. Shin asked for a closer look at the option to create a domain. Domain type modifications consisted of changing the environment. Anything could be created, whether it was a mountainous landscape or an untouched coastline. And the type of dungeon Shin chose was with a defense bias. The object creation function included the creation of various rooms and treasure chests. Special domain points determined the maximum number of traps and structures in the dungeon. At the same time, the maximum number of points increased due to the installation of useful equipment for the enemy. And the function of creating weapons allowed you to create traps for enemies, such as pits with stakes, poison gas, arrows, and much more, which should be a guaranteed death for attacking the territory of the King of Demons. The function of creating special restrictions. These are restrictions imposed on invaders. For example, the territory of Shin can simultaneously capture no more than 12 representatives of the faction of Order. Such functions are very useful, but require a large number of domain points. In parting, the girl wished Shin to strengthen his territory and enjoy the cozy life of a Demon King. On one of the most ordinary days, a message arrived on every phone. It said to take a special survey for distribution in connection with the start of the World Salvation Project. Many people thought it was just a prank or some kind of virus. This was what Kairi thought, but because of the anxiety that the media had stirred up, the girl all decided to take the distribution test. After completing the test, Kairi found herself outside her neighborhood and was left with only her phone in her hands. At the place where she used to live, an impenetrable zone had formed where no human could enter. Right in the middle of the city development, huge mountains had formed along with a dense forest. Although the news bulletin was updated every day and temporary shelter was provided for people who were stranded on the streets, this could not change the harsh reality that had set in. People were frightened and did not know what to expect next. Nor was there any information as to why the impassable areas that emerged were mostly in previously densely populated areas of the city. Kaori had learned from the news that there were 60 such restricted areas in her hometown of Kanazawa. From this, it appeared that 77% of the area was occupied by such zones, and all of it was mostly urban areas. The only good news for Kaori lately was meeting her friend Rin. As it turned out, the parents of both female students lived outside the city, and naturally they were worried about their daughters' fates. The girls were concerned about housing. Kaori had a room in the dormitory, and Rina was happy for her best friend. Rina herself boasted that a good acquaintance of hers had offered to stay in her room, and that. It also turned out that college classes were canceled, but it was still possible to enter the campus. The girls were excited about the canceled classes and exams, and were also looking forward to tomorrow. The nightly pool parties were scheduled to begin tomorrow, and many were excited for the opportunity to relax. Kaori and Rina were both first-year students and maintained a friendly relationship. The young blonde Rina was much more optimistic than her friend, and believed that there was nothing that could be done about what was going on anyway, so there was no need to beat herself up. Kaori was surprised at her friend, as she had expected her to be so optimistic. Rina has really somehow changed recently, and Kaori could not understand what had affected her friend's behavior so much. Unexpectedly, the young guys suggested that they go to a party together. The guys turned out to be insolent individuals and were extremely intrusive. Kaori immediately realized the guys' intentions to take advantage of Rina's plight and pretend as if they wanted to help, and in reality to solve their own interests. The guys saw Rina as an easy victim and began fantasizing aloud about what kind of swimsuit the girl would wear to the pool party. It all looked gross and vulgar, so Kaori decided to intervene in the situation and save her friend. With a confident swipe of her stick, Kaori delivered Rina from the hands of the insolent men. The guys were shocked by the beautiful brunette's determination, and Kaori advised them to keep their hands off her friend. Kaori promised to beat the guys with a stick if they didn't back off and get away. The young lovers of noisy parties decided not to test their fate and hurried to go as far away as possible from the abnormal, in their opinion, brunette. Riga was delighted by her friend's act and thanked Kaori for her help. The blonde called Kaori a true fencing champion and decided that now she wouldn't be in any danger at recess. But Kaori didn't support her friend's joy, because she was unpleasant to be in such a situation. Kaori told her friend to be careful and not to take strangers so lightly. But Rina saw a new message and exclaimed happily that it was some guys who replied to her. Kaori calmed down a bit and was glad that everything was fine. Rina was only worried about the upcoming barbecue and was looking forward to having fun in carefree company. Kaori immediately rejected her friend's offer to join the noisy company and decided that it was hopeless to try to fix Rina, because she was a real optimist. Subsequently, many people began to evacuate to the countryside, where there were almost no impassable areas, but all this could not solve the problem of lack of territory. There was an acute shortage of light, water, gas, and communications, and housing and food issues were also exacerbated. Kaori was concerned about the latest warnings heard on the news broadcasts. It was discussed that at this rate, in the near future, Japan's population would be 1/10 of what it is today. The girl realized the need to be more careful in such a hopeless situation. And since she is an ordinary student, there was nothing else to do but to go with the flow and hope for the best. Meanwhile, the Demon King Shin in his territory continued to make preparations for future attacks on his domain. Shin was finally convinced of the need to set up facilities favorable to the Order humans. That way he could increase his maximum level of domain points to spend on the defense of his territory. The best solution was to install rest areas that brought an additional 50 domain points. Soon came a system message that the maximum number of rest areas in a given territory had been reached. At the same time, a check was completed for the entire domain. Shin found out from the provided domain point distribution table that the special attacking character limit had a rather high cost and it took 80 points. And if one were to remove the limit altogether, one could set up various traps. However, The huge numerical advantage of the Men of Order was not to be forgotten, and so the function of limiting the number of attacking opponents was a very important factor for effective domain defense. Shin decided to definitely tighten the limitation if possible. It was impossible to do so now, as to reduce the number of attackers to even 11 required 150 domain points. And in the end, with such a limited number of points, there was almost nothing to customize. Shin pondered over whether he had done the right thing by choosing the special package for Demon King newbies. Well, anyway, there was nothing to be fixed now, although it wouldn't be a bad idea to make a few more passages in this cave. The next important step that needed to be taken was to create subordinates to protect the territory, and this was something Shin had not yet encountered. The subordinates created were very different and clearly belonged to different kinds of creatures. Shin was able to create an E-ranked wolf, an F-ranked slime, an F-ranked rat, an E-ranked bat and goblin, and the strongest was a D-ranked kobold. These were all the subordinates that had enough points, and it all really looked like a fragment from some game. Shin looked at the monsters he saw for the first time in real life with interest. Shin made his voice as serious as possible and introduced himself as the Demon King and explained to the monsters that they now had to follow all his orders. Next, Shin decided to find out what his subordinates were capable of and how they could fight. In order to find out, Shin decided to make his subordinates fight against each other. The first pair chosen was a rat and a slime. Shin ordered the fight to begin, but warned that it was by no means a mortal combat. Visually, it was difficult to determine who exactly was the favorite in this pairing, and it remained only to carefully. The rat was much more aggressive and immediately set the pace of the battle, but the slime was skillful in evading attacks and was not inferior in speed. The rat's main weapons were its sharp fangs and equally dangerous claws. It was thanks to them that the rat began to dominate. Shin figured out everything he wanted and ordered the fight to stop before anyone was seriously hurt. The next pair chosen were the bat and the wolf, which looked completely different. The bat didn't look very promising in this fight, and Shin wondered about its chances. The wolf was both bigger and much more aggressive, and its only disadvantage was that it couldn't fly. Eventually, in a deft jump, the wolf was able to grab the bat, and that was fatal to the flying monster. After that, the wolf brought the defeated foe to Shin's feet. The boy decided that apparently in this way, the wolf was showing its loyalty and showing respect. But of course Shin could not eat such a strange gift, and only noted for himself quite meaningful behavior of his wards. The last fight was a clash between a goblin and a kobold, and it promised to be a real spectacle. From the first seconds of the confrontation, it was hard to tell who was dominating. The sharp attacks of the goblin were quickly replaced by powerful kobold blows, and all this added to the dynamics of the fight. Gradually, the monsters became much angrier and felt the true aggression of the Demon King's wards. Goblin was not inferior in strength kobold, and began to show the effects of crushing blows. At this moment, Shin realized how little he understood what was happening. After all, he had ordered these monsters to fight, and yet had absolutely no idea what would happen next. It became obvious that it was possible to get seriously injured or even say goodbye to one's life during such a fight. Until this moment, Shin had not yet taken everything that was happening seriously, because his life had never been associated with such things before. Shin was horrified at the sight of the blood and suffering of the monsters and realized that there was no excuse for his stupidity. None of this was some kind of simulation, and this was a new but still real world. And this is the reality that you now have to live with and survive in. Shin was upset at his decision to arrange duels among the subordinate monsters. The Demon King felt that he lacked imagination and had done a foolish thing. Lion remembered the words of the organizer girl about the need to kill the attacking people of order. But it was obvious that the first priority was to avoid getting killed himself during such an attack. It all seemed strange to Shin from the beginning, and the rule of kill or be killed seemed like a terrifying prospect. Shin tried to convince himself to endure the future trials. The Lady Chaos Guide asked what the Demon King was so concerned about. The omniscient girl who had suddenly appeared reminded him that Shin had made that choice himself, and so there was no need for regret. The organizer asked what was the purpose of Shin making his subordinates fight among themselves. After all, it was most likely for the sake of testing their abilities to see how effective the monsters would be against the men of order. The girl wondered if Shin had really decided to find out the real strength of the monsters who were now his subordinates in such a cruel way. The lady organizer rebuked Shin's indecisiveness and constant complaining about his current situation. After all, one must accept reality and agree that he was the one who created the monsters and made them fight and hurt each other. Shin, feeling annoyed, agreed that it was all on his conscience, and he was to blame for the suffering of his subordinates. The agitated Demon King called everything that was happening unfair. After all, he is a true enemy of order, was chosen by chaos, but now locked in his own house, and this is not his wish at all. Lion complained about the lack of opportunity to escape from the confines of his territory, for it is foolish and inefficient. Shin resented the fact that he had to just sit and wait helplessly for the forces of order to invade, and such a situation was very unnerving. Shin stated that since this was a world salvation project, he himself wanted to be saved before saving the world. But looking around, Shin did not find the girl organizer and wondered if it was just a dream, although everything seemed too real. Shin wondered if everything that was happening to him was fair, because this was something he clearly didn't want. After becoming a Demon King, Shin lost all his memories of a normal life, and with it went love, friendship, and many other things that make a person human. Because of this, a sense of danger pervades the body, and the only available feeling one can perceive is fear. Shin was ashamed of his fear and wished that it was really all just a bad dream. But unfortunately, the screen of the smartphone said otherwise, because it still had information about Shin as a breed of demons and a party of chaos. Shin was mentally tired and wanted to go to sleep to escape from the frightening reality, at least for a while. But unfortunately, Shin was still able to fall asleep and only wasted his time. The Demon King felt that he couldn't go on like this. While Shin was trying to sleep, his glasses recovered. The guy decided that since he was a Demon King, then he was an enemy to all mankind. Therefore, there is no need to do anything, because the Order people themselves will come to resupply. Shin decided to resist fate at all costs to survive, and for this purpose, it is necessary to become cruel and unscrupulous. For the sake of survival, and for the sake of gaining freedom, one must become a Demon King. Finished with his own motivation, Shin decided to continue checking. Firmly determined to harden his heart, and for the sake of becoming a true Demon King, Shin conducted a series of tests with his subordinates. First of all, it was necessary to find out what he was dealing with, because one couldn't strategize without knowing one's strength. Apparently, the strength of monsters depends on the points spent on them, not their rank. Then perhaps one should focus on battle techniques. Shin watched with interest as several wolves attacked the kobold. In the end, due to the number, the wolves were able to pin down the enemy, and it was obvious that attacking together increased combat power. The Demon King then decided to conduct another experiment and asked his charges to choose the weapon they liked best. Shin decided that if his wards were well equipped, it would be possible to think of more strategy options and better understand their actual capabilities. The experiment revealed that the most appropriate weapons for a goblin were an axe and a bow, while a kobold was pretty good with a sword and a spear. A kobold equipped with a sword and shield was perfectly suited for defending territory, and the weapons greatly increased its abilities. However, if one ignored the points spent on monsters, the strongest subordinates would be goblins. Shin was confident that with such bold and fast goblins, he definitely wouldn't lose. Also, Shin decided that if he thought about defense based on the available strength, it was obviously better to create one kobold than a dozen slimes. And if one reinforced the defense with a few kobolds, it would be easy to repel an attack by unsuspecting Order people. But it was unknown how many times such a strategy would work. It was also unknown how long and exactly how many opponents fully equipped kobolds could repel. Shin immediately imagined how many people of the Order would refuse to invade his territory because of too difficult a defense, even if they were interested in a rare reward. This was all bad, because in that case, the low-level Order people would attack the other Demon Kings, and this must be avoided. Shin decided to not only provide an advantage at the expense of treasure for the people who chose his territory to attack, he also needed to place subordinates who would be easy to defeat to begin with. While making preparations for the invasion, Shin felt that he was not just thinking of a defense plan, but actually controlling his entire dungeon. Drawing a plan of his territory, Shin at one point recalled his joyful childhood. One day back then, Shin was playing a popular game and couldn't understand why the Demon King couldn't defeat the hero, since it's not hard to defeat a level 1 opponent. That's what Shin thought as he tried to understand the whole point of the computer game. Shin pondered the possible future development, and it was still difficult to determine exactly how things would be. Shin found it amusing to compare himself to that computerized Demon King, for they did indeed have similar problems and methods of solving them. After that, Shin continued to test for a few days. It was necessary to find out how many subordinates and weapons to create in general. Shin decided by the end of all the tests to prepare as much as possible to welcome the invaders. Also, almost 7,000 development points would be available before the end of the lull. And so from now on, not a single point could be wasted. In preparation, Shin strategized and built up his forces, following the same algorithm over and over again. And those subordinates that Shin felt sincere disgust for at the beginning, but in the process of training, he gradually began to like them. Shin even made for himself something like a throne. After all, he is still the king of demons and need to look appropriate. The time for tedious preparations flew by very quickly and eventually came to the end of the supposed peace in the world. It was time for the fateful day for the entire world, because today was the day that those people who did not yet understand what exactly had happened would finally face the new reality. Everything was ready in Shin's territory to welcome the first invaders, but waiting proved to be an incredibly boring process. From the new message, Shin learned that right now, the part of humanity that belonged to the Order faction was receiving an explanation about the World Salvation Program. An attack was expected right after the temporary lull ended, and Shin felt a little anxious. The Demon King decided to check the latest news and found out that an unprecedented world crisis had come and all humans were called to destroy the Demon Kings to save the world. It became obvious that the world's population now perceived the Chaos faction as the real villains and enslavers of all mankind. The entire public was motivated to overthrow the Demon Kings. Shin suggested that humanity did not know that the Demon Kings were actually ordinary humans as well. Because of this, people would kill Demon Kings without any proceedings in the name of so-called justice. It was all too trivial and stupid, but Shin decided to endure the difficulties and eventually gain his own freedom. Therefore, one should not worry about people who are eager to get the supposed justice they have been persuaded of. Nor was it worth feeling sorry for the selfish Demon Kings who were only competitors. In spite of all this, Shin felt that hard times lay ahead of him and would have to dare to do many things that he had never done before. Soon excitement was replaced by confidence, and Shin was ready to face those who would dare to fight him and enter his territory. During his training, Shin spent his free time watching strength training videos and strengthening his body. In addition, Shin has been practicing with weapons, choosing a kobold as his sparring partner. Shin wondered if all these efforts helped him become even a little better. The formidable kobold roared approvingly, which confirmed Shin's significant progress in Shin's battle skills. The young Demon King was flattered by the monster's praise and explained to his subordinates that they would have to fight humans like him. Although many of the opponents would be humans who had never even held a weapon, and these training battles would be useful in the future. Kobold listened attentively to the Demon King, but suddenly there was a message on his smartphone that distracted Shin. The message turned out to be an alarm warning of an invasion by the first invaders. It was a welcome moment, and Shin felt a rush of adrenaline. Thanks to the surveillance system, Shin was able to recognize a group of well-equipped soldiers cautiously infiltrating his territory. The soldiers turned out to be members of the Japanese Defense Force, and they immediately met up with a group of slimes. The well-trained soldiers informed the captain that suspicious objects were approaching. The unit commander ordered them to prepare for battle and hold formation. Shin eagerly waited for the situation to develop and carefully watched the invaders. On command, all the soldiers opened a barrage of fire, and the entire dungeon was filled with the noise of crackling firearms. The girl organizer asked if Shin was ready to meet the invaders. The Demon King was happy to see the lady and decided to tell everything in detail. Shin explained that there were slimes and rats near the entrance to the territory under his control that would be easy to defeat. They would serve as bait for the invaders. But the further the men of order advance, the more treasure chests they will be able to find, but the monsters will also become much stronger. Shin also boasted about how he had taken care of his ward's equipment. The girl was fascinated by Shin's organizational skills and asked who exactly he was calling the vile goblins. But the Demon King proudly declared that it was his secret. Shin's plan was for the surviving invaders to advertise his territory perfectly. The bait would be the weak monsters at the start and the splendid treasures available. And even if some opponents are able to reach the very end of the dungeon, they will meet 2 kobolds in silver armor, and of course the Demon King himself. The girl organizer wondered what Shin would do in the event of his defeat. But the Demon King did not even anticipate such a development and was confident of his success. The girl apologized for her difficult question and asked Shin not to worry. This question was really unexpected, and doubts and worries arose in the Demon King's mind. The combined attack of slimes and rats frightened the squad of soldiers. Firearms failed to give the invaders an advantage and calls for retreat were heard. The self-defense force squad tried to withdraw in an orderly manner, but the chaotic firing was due to ricochets in the confined space, and some of the soldiers were hit by their own weapons. The slides accelerated simultaneously with the rats and were able to make panicked soldiers who were anxious to get out of the trap as soon as possible. Such a rapid retreat of the self-defense forces really surprised Shin, because the guys well armed with firearms looked like promising opponents. Shin did not put much hope in Crimea and the slimes, but it turned out to be a mistake. The first battle ended with a convincing victory of the defenders of the territory of the Demon King. At the same time, the invaders could not even get to the treasure chests, and therefore it will be necessary to adjust the difficulty level. The news sites very soon reported the complete failure of the authorities and how the army was unable to fulfill its objectives. The main surprise was that firearms proved to be ineffective against the monsters. Thus, the large-scale invasion of the territory of the Demon Kings within the country turned out to be a tragedy. 3 days had passed since the first invasion, and the news was much more optimistic. It was reported that 12 soldiers of Hokkaido's 3rd Division had been promoted after they passed the Hokkaido dungeon. There was also mention of some student volunteers who were able to grab weapons from the dungeon. It became known that low-level monsters can be killed with cold weapons. Shin was not at all surprised at such a fast adaptation of humans. After all, it was one of humanity's best qualities. There was a lot of information about the territories of the Demon Kings in the chat rooms, and Shin also decided to take part in the discussion. But after a few hours of being in the various chat rooms, Shin felt incredibly annoyed. This time, his territory was not invaded by soldiers at all, but seemingly ordinary guys and girls. The next invaders actually turned out to be ordinary teenagers. Shin counted 12 people who weren't even 20 years old. Apparently, they looked like high school students. The girls were visibly worried and suggested that they wait for the older fighters. But the guys were confident in their abilities. According to the guys, there were only rats and slimes in this dungeon, and so they would quickly deal with all the monsters. Also, the team of juvenile heroes knew that at the end of the dungeon there was a Zukariot, and they would definitely get to it. At least they were so determined. The guys on the team were happy that one monster king, who apparently doesn't know anything about computers, had leaked information to the network that gave them an advantage. Shin, thanks to the leaked information, learned that the core of the territory cannot be frozen, and also that the Demon Kings can safely do without sleep and rest. Also, the Demon Kings are not affected by the lack of water and food. So this information can still be considered useful. The detachment of young heroes was soon met by a group of slimes, but this did not upset the invaders, and they jointly dealt with the monsters quickly. The first victory added even more optimism and confidence to the men of order, and they hurried to the first treasure chest. But everything turned out to be not as simple as we would have liked, and the treasure chest was guarded by a group of goblins who were not going to give it up without a fight. The guys decided that the goblins were just weak monsters, and they could easily defeat them. In doing so, the guys ignored the fact that the goblins were armed with knives and looked quite determined. The leader of the dungeon conquering team stated that they had already gone far and couldn't just go back. The girls Rina and Tanaka decided to be entrusted with the task of handling the goblins. The boy Deguchi and Kairi would have to attack immediately after the magic attack. Yuya was assigned the task of defeating the goblin in the center, while Fuji chose the target on the right. Kayama was to deal with treating the wounded, while the rest of the plan was to support the main fighters and follow the leader's orders. The two girls were the first to attack and fired fireballs at the goblins, which were intended to stun the monsters. Some goblins did take significant damage from the fire magic, and at this point, the Order representatives rushed to the attack to build on the success. The goblins felt neither fear nor panic and rushed into a counterattack, and eventually a real fight ensued. In this turmoil, it was difficult to determine who was winning, and all that was left was to wait. The goblins' training was not in vain, and they easily managed to break through to the defenseless wizard girls. With the first blow, one of the goblins wounded the blonde and took her out of the game. At this point, the team leader panicked and started chaotically sending orders to his wards, trying to put the responsibility for the local failure on someone other than himself. Yuya and Fuji were themselves upset for their own failure in defense and felt insecure. The guys apologized, but it was obvious that they hadn't expected such strength from the goblins. Shin, watching their opponents, decided that they had no chance. After all, unlike the slimes, which could be known in advance and easily defeated, the goblins were armed and well-trained, and now the students realized the consequences of their overconfidence. But unfortunately, the goblins tended to attack those who looked weaker and choose the most suitable target for themselves at the beginning of the battle. Shin decided to think about this problem later and fix it somehow. Rina rushed to her injured friend in hopes of helping her, but the young female body did not respond in any way to being asked to get up. Kairi, along with her partner, decided to help the girl lying on the ground and lowered their guard. But at least they had already managed to destroy a few monsters. The guys were horrified at the deaths of the two sorceress girls who couldn't defend themselves from the swift attack of the goblins. Yuya was outraged at the injustice of the world and cursed the entire World Salvation Project. Meanwhile, the team leader decided to take a look at the contents of the treasure chest. Inside the wooden box was a sword. The team leader was surprised by the strange weapon that he hadn't seen on the dungeon passage sites. Through quickly analyzing the items, the guy was able to find out that the weapon was called a D-rank black iron sword. Rina didn't know much about weapons and asked how cool this sword was. The team leader was delighted because this sword was unique and compared to the most common E-rank sword on the internet. This weapon was the strongest at the moment. Shin resented this success of his opponents and decided that he would quickly go bankrupt thanks to such gifts. Although thanks to all this turned out to be a great publicity stunt, and if you quickly spread information on the internet about this wonderful sword, there will be a lot of people who want to invade this territory. The guys were excited about the great find and suggested to try to go further into the dungeon and try to find more treasure chests. Shin was astonished by such foolishness and didn't want these people to go any further. After all, if these idiots were to advance further, they would eventually have to be dealt with in a brutal manner themselves. Shin continued to watch his opponents and waited for them to decide how to proceed. Kairi warned of the possible consequences, as it would be difficult to lead the wounded back out. Arguments broke out, and in the end, it was decided to move forward to avenge the dead girls. The Sword of Black Iron added to the hero's confidence. Shin was surprised by the power of such a strong weapon, as the team of Order representatives defeated the wolves and bats without much difficulty and subsequently managed to capture almost half of his territory. Such success only added to the students' haste to get to the Demon King and destroy him. Shin realized that he would still have to decide to do something serious since these fools didn't know how to stop in time. In such a situation, it was necessary to neutralize the person who walked ahead with a black iron sword. The Demon King's dungeon contained many dangers that the invaders did not even know about, and just such a surprise they were about to meet. Not expecting a trap, guys and girls were taken by surprise by a deluge of sharp arrows. The very first to be struck by the deadly blow was the very same guy Deguchi with the black iron sword. Deguchi did not even immediately realize what happened, but the traitorously weak hand had already dropped the unique weapon, and his body became unruly as if it was unplugged. Kairi was shocked at what had happened, and was only miraculously not targeted by the gunfire. The lunatic arrow was the only class item that Shin was able to smelt. After creating such a weapon, Shin's smelting skill rose to B rank, even though the cost of such an arrow was 100 points. Shin nicknamed the goblin archers as dishonest guys due to the fact that they were low-level monsters themselves, yet they used high-level weapons. With the exception of Kairi, the entire team of Order men rushed away from the dangerous place, and only the girl tried to render aid to her mortally wounded comrade. At the last gasp, Deguchi ordered Kairi not to waste time and also run away to save her life. The frightened girl lost her composure and trembled with terror, but the dying boy managed to give her the black iron sword. Yes, all this touching and horrible scene of course watched Shin. In the end, the girl Kiori still listened to her doomed friend and taking the valuable weapon hurried to leave the dangerous dungeon. The result of the battle was that the team of 12 brave students was reduced to 9 and left the territory of the Demon King Shin in a panic. After this invasion, 3 more teams of heroes came to Shin's territory. But all 3 groups were much weaker, and after a brief fight with the slugs at the entrance, they quickly left the dungeon. Shin decided to check the chat rooms online and see how effective his advertisement was. So the group that lost 3 members, despite escaping, still managed to carry away the strongest weapon, and it became an event among the people of Order. Shin's dungeon was trending on social media along with the very same team of invaders. One of the group happened to have a pretty popular social media account where he braggingly made a post about the unique D-rank weapon he received. This guy also shared information about his level, which he was able to raise by 2 points at once. In addition, thanks to the interview with the student hugging the black iron sword, the news of the dungeon spread very quickly. As it turned out, the dead guy Deguchi had bequeathed his beautiful weapon to this girl named Kairi. Rina was crying and was very sorry that everyone ran away like cowards and no one could help Deguchi. But Kairi was more reserved in her emotions and only dreamed of retribution. After that incident and due to its popularity, Shin's phone continued to sound the security alarm quite often. The newscast was devoted entirely to discussing how people all over the country flocked to places of livelihood for the sake of raising their level. This was driven by the desire to survive, as the only way to do so was to become stronger. As of late, the government decided to control the entrances to places of earning in order to ease the uncontrolled flow of those who wanted to enter. Now, in order to enter a place of livelihood, one would have to give information about oneself in advance. And after leaving the restricted area, everyone is required to report the items found. Another team was about to go on an adventure, but the girl tried to dissuade her friends as she was very scared. The girl tried to explain that it was not at all necessary to fight and risk their lives, and all this could be done by other people. The guys largely agreed with their friend and decided to do everything next time. But suddenly the TV anchor offered to listen to breaking news. But in the next moment, the team of men had no more time for news, for a whole pack of wolves was bearing down on them. Shin carefully followed the news broadcasts and was delighted to learn that aggressive monsters had suddenly started to appear in some untouchable territories. Shin decided that it had happened faster than expected. The territory of his domain had become a very popular place to earn money, and because of that, the number of people willing to conquer his dungeon had greatly increased. Shilo was confident in his subordinates because they knew exactly how to act during the invasion. People nicknamed dungeons with low-rank monsters or dungeons with good rewards with relatively weak defenses as places to earn money. Shin intentionally offered his territory as a place to make money and in the shadows engaged in manipulating information in order to protect his territory. When communicating on the internet, Shin frequently changed his name and masked his IP address, sometimes pretending to be a person from the Order faction and communicating on popular blogs and spreading the information he wanted. The purpose of manipulating the information was to ignite psychological anxiety among the still numerous first-level people of the Order. Shin's directly targeted activities bore fruit and public opinion came out in favor of protecting the money-making venues. Eventually, a cycle of weak summoners to Shin's dungeon formed, defeating the right number of monsters and gaining some experience. Shin was also helped by the fact that monsters started to come out of their territories. Because of this, even more people would now challenge dungeons to raise their level. The so-called easy money-making places were especially popular. Because of this practice, Shin didn't even know when it was his children's turn to use goblins and kobolds in defending the territory. These subordinates were too strong, and there was no point in fielding them for dungeon defense. Meanwhile, team number 3D309 was preparing for the next entry into the dungeon, which was scheduled for 4 o'clock in the evening. The team members were repeating important information and trying to cope with the excitement. Shin was happy with this situation because, as planned, his territory was in high demand. People from the Order faction were literally lining up to visit this popular dungeon. All of this was an indication of a successful life at the Demon King. Shin was also completely satisfied with the perfect training of his subordinates and only had to work on the balance. At this point, it was the turn to go deep into the tunnels for team number 307. Outwardly, the men of Order looked confident and didn't particularly resemble the frightened newcomers, who didn't even move in full confidence. Already familiar message about the invasion did not frighten Shin at all. Everything was familiar and happened strictly according to plan. Demon King understood that the main thing is not to stop and give people Order valuable gifts, thereby supporting in them the passion and desire for excitement. But upon closer examination of the new opponents, Shin was shocked. The members of the Order team were all level 3, and the man in front was equipped in black iron gear. The Order team appeared very confident and disciplined. The commander ordered them to keep moving forward only. It was obvious that this time the Shin territory was not visited by newcomers. Shin decided not to take any chances and sent goblin archers with fine weapons into battle. The people of the Order did not expect to meet such opponents at all, because everyone had long known that this dungeon met mostly simple monsters. Moreover, such goblins were not found anywhere else. The surprise effect and long-range attacks of the goblins were decisive in this confrontation, and the invaders were defeated. Shin quickly checked the latest reviews of his dungeon, and to his satisfaction, he didn't find any negative mentions. The goblins were busy collecting equipment from their opponents, and Shin turned his attention to a new message. Before he could absorb the text, Shin felt an incredible surge of energy that literally spilled over his entire body. This could only be evidence of one thing, and Shin did not immediately realize it. Shin had indeed raised his level, and it was a wonderful event. The limit of summoning and creation points had increased to 200 and also added 5 improvement points, which was a very useful acquisition. After the enhancement, Shin noticed the strange behavior of the goblin archers and couldn't understand what was going on with the abominable creatures. But then a bright flash of light completely brought Shin out of his emotional decision. The bright glow was exactly the same as when the subordinates were created, and Shin watched the change in the goblins with amazement. There was a real evolution of the goblin archers, and it caused the Demon King real amazement. From the system message, Shin learned that the rank of the goblin archers had been raised from E to D. Although before, the Demon King didn't even know about the existence of ranks in his subordinates, and now this opened up new possibilities. Until now, Shin had considered his subordinates to be merely expendable, but after the evolution, it was obvious that they could be used in a special way. After much deliberation, Shin decided to select a special group of his subordinates for future evolution. The Demon King decided to change his defense tactics and ordered some monsters to sit in ambush at the treasure chest. At the same time, the vodkas and goblins were now responsible for battling the visitors deep in the dungeon. In this way, Shin sought to evenly distribute the experience he received among his subjects in priority order. It was very interesting to see exactly how different monsters would evolve. Only now did Shin realize that he felt a real sense of human interest that he hadn't felt in a long time. A real sense of curiosity appeared, and it became clear how far Shin had traveled from his past consciousness. To distract himself a bit, the Demon King decided to get busy distributing ability improvement points. Shin pondered over where he could best spend his available enhancement points. The choice was between body enhancement and creation enhancement. The Demon King thought that if he were the person he used to be, he would save up points until he had all the information he needed. However, right now, Shin's life was at stake, and so it was not worth saving up for an important reinforcement. Shin regretted that there wasn't a single website online with a walkthrough for the Demon King, and decided to personally fix this problem. At the same time, Shin didn't want to completely open the information to all people and decided to limit the visit to the site with a special password that only the Demon Kings would know. But all this will be quite difficult, because it will have to personally check the credibility of visitors. This time, Shin decided to spend the available points to increase his creation ability. This choice was made because the plan to strengthen the subjects was going quite well. After all, the most important goal for the Demon King was to prevent the people of Order from getting to themselves. With the creation enhancement, new opportunities opened up. It was now possible for Shin to create new subjects such as Dark Elf and Orc. The ability to create anthropomorphic subjects was a welcome development for the Demon King. Shin had long wanted to create monsters that he could talk to. Now it was possible to say goodbye to the sad loneliness, because no social network could replace real live communication. Shin was really tired of interacting with his subjects who could only growl or bark in response. Now things should be different and his dungeon finally hear normal human speech. Without wasting time, Shin hurried to create a dark elf and was surprised, for he managed to summon a rather beautiful girl of elven lineage. Shin looked at the girl with interest and introduced himself as the Demon King, who called her to his service. Shin suddenly bit his tongue very painfully due to the very long pause in communication. The dark elfess at this time only silently watched her master's suffering. Then the beautiful girl began to speak, but alas, Shin couldn't understand anything, for the dark elf was communicating in her native tongue. After several attempts to establish more or less normal contact, Shin realized that the girl understands him quite well, but it is difficult for her to answer in a language he understands. The king did not expect such an unpleasant surprise at all, because he certainly could not know the language of the Dark Elves. And especially in the menu of the smartphone also lacked such a rare dialect for mankind. The next subordinate, Shin created a huge orc, from which he did not expect to be able to communicate. But the Demon King all decided not to be upset and continue to take care of his dungeon. Already by tradition, Shin decided to hold training duels to determine the strength of subordinates. As usual, the Demon King reminded them to fight carefully so as not to kill the opponent. The first fight was an orc against a kobold, and in a fairly equal fight, the orc eventually won. It remained to find out the strength of the Dark Elf. Without much effort, the mysterious elven girl won a confident victory against 3 kobolds at once. Shin was delighted by what he saw and realized that the elf girl was a very strong character on his team. The Demon King thought that if the elf could still talk to the elf, she would be an invaluable asset. After that, Shin turned his attention to the possibility of expanding the territory. The Demon King ordered the kobolds and goblins to chase away the next invaders as soon as possible. Shin decided to try something before the next order commands came. The system offered to start expanding the territory, and Shin did not hesitate to confirm this request. Immediately after the confirmation, the transformation of the territory began, and Shin eagerly awaited the end result. A secret staircase appeared in Shin's dungeon, which should expand the possibilities for the invaders. Shin decided to make the most of this expansion, and under the guise of an anonymous adventurer, he quickly spread the information on the internet. All of this caused a lot of discussion, and it was only necessary to wait for the New Order people who wanted to see the mysterious staircase with their own eyes. After expanding the area, Shin distributed his subordinates in a new way. The first floor, as before, was the safest place with the strongest monsters. The second floor was equipped to maximize the attraction of high-level people with their treasures. Such enemies were opposed by the Dark Elf and the rest of the best forces. Thanks to this arrangement, Shin could maximize his experience. To make his dungeon more attractive, Shin put weapons that were higher ranked than black iron weapons on the added level. In the treasure box was an excellent silver spear. This great weapon was going to serve as a great advertisement, and Shin decided to give this silver spear to those who were the most active on social media. Such a person was found quite quickly, and it brought incredible joy to the chosen hero. Such a weapon was a very expensive gift, but Shin decided that the benefits would far outweigh the costs. The guy who received the silver spear became a real star of the internet. His popularity allowed him to gain hundreds of thousands of followers, and it all perfectly advertised Shin's dungeon. The owner of the spear thanked the weapon for his successes and boasted a significant level increase. After the successful advertising campaign, A whole month passed, during which Shin was able to gain a huge amount of experience and rise to level 3. The level increase allowed one to evolve and choose some race. Among the choices offered were demon, elf, human, palace, slime, fairy, vampire, and many more different interesting races. Evolution allowed demon kings to reincarnate into a completely different race after reaching a certain level. At the same time, different races had different subjects. Also, to evolve into some races, certain conditions had to be met. Shin realized while reading the information about evolution that he couldn't go back to another menu screen. It became obvious that because of this, he wouldn't be able to replenish the number of subjects, and a quick decision had to be made. The Demon King found out that there was a list of races for which he had met the conditions and could evolve into. The races of slimes, beasts, and fairies became available because of Shin's frequent use of such subjects. The vampire race because of the active use of bats. It was strange to gain access to the dwarf race because Shin had never had such monsters. Shin envisioned the dwarfs as bearded, stunted, and muscular men. These creatures were constantly feuding with elves, liked to drink, and were excellent blacksmiths. Shin realized that blacksmithing was closely related to the ability of coping, which he had used repeatedly, and most likely it was what allowed him to discover such a race. And if you think about it this way, Shin couldn't have chosen a race of demons or elves, for example. And creation, which Shin often used, is a special right of demon kings and should not affect the race. Shin decided that the original race of humans could be removed from the list right away. The next 4 races on the list became available because of status, and the remaining races became available because of the subjects used. However, this list, and especially the position of the vampire race, discouraged that the evolution screen would be different from the subject creation screen. Shin decided that it didn't seem like the condition for unlocking the vampire race was the use of bats, although it was very difficult to make sense of it all. And if that was indeed the case, then including vampires for the last 3 races had special conditions for evolution. Such an explanation made the most sense to Shin, and he decided to make his choice. Shin realized that different races had different subjects. At the moment, Shin had at his disposal a valuable and fully evolved goblin, wolf, and kobold. And building off of that, the best choice of race would be beast or fairy. That being said, Shin was concerned that the second dark elf was much stronger than the first, and perhaps it was still worth taking his time and choosing a race. After long and agonizing deliberation, Shin still made his choice and only hoped for luck in this difficult matter. The process of evolving into a different frame proved to be a very painful procedure from the first seconds. Shin felt intense pain, and it seemed that his entire body was literally burning. The horrible agony that lasted a little over a minute seemed like an eternity to the Demon King. Eventually, the evolutionary process ended, and Shin became a member of the vampire frame. Vampires were a rare kind of creature and did not depend on status or their subjects at all. Shin now became a demon king, leading his life in darkness, for it was darkness that was the native element of vampires. In doing so, Shin could now control his blood relatives as well as his subjects. The conditions for access to evolution specified a ban on any sunlight, and Shin had to spend 30 days in his room. Shin was indignant and could not understand why. In that case, no one had told him about evolution before. Shin remembered that he really hadn't gone outside his room, or rather dungeon, and now he was able to get the opportunity to evolve. Indeed, all this time at first changing the world, Shiro to manage his subjects and check the tracking system use a smartphone. And when there was nothing to do at all, he just surfed the internet in search of interesting information. Such a mode was basically fine with Shin, and he didn't really think about anything extraneous. Thanks to the fact that Shin was now a vampire, he could significantly increase his body and magic power while in the shadows. But in the other space, vampire on the contrary weakened. Shin was now resistant to shadow attacks. But the resistance was greatly reduced to light, fire, water attacks, and silverware. All this did not please Shin very much, for the disadvantages at first glance appeared to be much more than the advantages. Shin immediately thought of the silver spear that he himself had given to his own enemies. It was a serious mistake, and the Demon King promised himself that he would never put silver objects in his chest again. Because Shinu became a vampire, he had many questions, But the Demon King decided to look for answers later after he restored the number of his subjects. A giant flying mouse was now possible to create, and it was an added bonus for the vampire race. But at the same time, there was bad news. After transforming into a vampire, Shin now required twice as many points to create subjects, the only exception being bats. Shin was upset about this negative effect of evolution, and now it was clear how little was actually explained about the principles of the project to save the world. And the character of the girl organizer herself is terrible, for she mentioned so many things. After calming down a bit, Shin decided to look at his new subjects and created a giant bat and a nasty ghoul. He also managed to create a werewolf, who although belonged to the frame of the cursed beasts, but looked quite like a normal human. Shin traditionally introduced himself and once again bought his tongue to his chagrin. In response from the werewolf, the Demon King heard an unknown language and realized that he wouldn't be able to communicate after all. Shin resented the fact that despite all the fantastic events, there was no way to translate the strange language and just talk to his subjects. After creating the monsters, Shin decided to get busy making a new defense plan. From the news broadcasts, Shin learned about the disturbing events. It turned out that 3 days ago, incredible accomplishments had taken place for the people of Order. The world's first managed areas in New York City had been cleared. Some similar areas in Europe had also been cleared as well. All of this gave humanity great hope and added courage for battles with the Demon Kings. Moreover, Shin was alarmed to learn how the Demon King territories in Japan and Yokohama City had been cleared 2 days ago. And just yesterday, in Shin's hometown, a group of former students between the ages of 18 and 24 had cleared a territory. The leader of this group was a guy with glasses who strongly resembled the student council president. The real heroes of this squad seemed to be the girl Kairi with a black iron sword and the womanizer guy with a silver spear. Thanks to the strong members, this team was astonishing in its results and at the same time inspiring others to desperately fight against the Monster Kings. Although these students were originally on different teams, after obtaining unique weapons in the dungeon, these heroes began to develop rapidly. After receiving support from Kanazawa City itself, the strongest heroes united into one group. It turned out that among the men of Order were real enthusiasts who could lead the others. Shin immediately realized what kind of dungeon they were talking about, because it was in this dungeon that the heroes had discovered the great weapons. Shin also remembered that half of the heroes from the Twin Peaks group were his first visitors, and they had lost 3 people that day. This group was perfectly complemented by the Guy Wei who was lucky enough to get his hands on the silver spear, and it made him a very recognizable hero. Shin thought it would be nice to have nothing at all to do with the creation of such a serious group of adversaries, but that was not the case. For the sake of publicizing the successes of the Twin Peaks group, the city government decided to organize a press conference to make as many people as possible aware of the heroes' outstanding successes. Numerous journalists asked Kairi what her plans were for her upcoming activities, for it was important for the public to know. Kairi stated that their group consisted of purifiers selected from Kanazawa City, and they had received special permission from the mayor. At the moment, they had managed to clear the 3 territories controlled by the Demon Kings. Kairi made it clear that their group would continue to clean up the money-making areas in their hometown. The reporters asked if the group's plans included cleansing the dungeon where Kairi lost her comrades. The girl confirmed her desire to avenge the deaths of her friends, and in this their entire team stands in solidarity. But suddenly, the fellow Lanceman Wei intervened in the conversation and jokingly suggested that they leave the places of earning money for other groups. At this, Wei said that since this was being done for the whole world, it would probably be impossible to avoid the emergence of new money-making places, and so every worthwhile group would be given a chance to prove themselves. Shin decided that he was now in a situation where he needed to strengthen his strength as soon as possible. After all, the world record for clearing the Demon King's territory was 14 days from the start of the events. And the enthusiasts from Kanazawa didn't need much more than that, only 18 days. Shin often looked through the account of the stars among the people of the Y Order and often found very useful information there. Shin decided that 18 days would not be enough to clear the 3 territories, and most likely the enemy team members were raising their level. and now they already had tremendous experience in clearing dungeons. Shin pondered over the success of the Twin Peaks team and couldn't understand how they were able to clear the territories so quickly and needed to find out. Shin decided that according to the most optimistic calculations, he had about 30 days to spare and needed to raise his level to at least 5th. In order to do so, he had to deal with the distribution of experience points, learn the condition for creating the Blood Bowl, check the skills of his subjects, and create family members. There was a lot of work to be done, and Shin decided to do it gradually. The system suggested to create a Blood Bowl out of whatever is available and to spend all available points. The whole point of the contract was to give the Bloody Bowl to someone and thus make a relative for the Demon King. Shin was interested in such an interesting opportunity to create a relative for himself from his own subordinate. Although it wasn't quite clear exactly how many points would be needed to do so, since Shin didn't have the maximum number of points at his disposal at the moment. In the end, the Demon King decided that no matter how many points he had at the moment, it was still worth it to create a Blood Bowl and gain a new relative. The process itself should have been very simple judging from the description of the Blood Bowl. But first, the Demon King wanted to distribute the experience points gained from leveling up, and the first thing to do was to strengthen his own body and magic power. Now it was necessary to remember well the peculiarity of the vampire, because in the shadows all of Shin's statuses and magical power were strengthened, and in another space they became much weaker. Then the Demon King was interested in changing the type of his territory, and it was even possible to create a hard-to-traverse forest. Having finished exploring the new possibilities, the Demon King decided to conduct a test. The updated territory looked much more colorful, but still the forest landscape was not too much to Shin's liking. It turned out to be very difficult to move around in such an area, and it was not suitable for Shin's planning. The only good thing was that it was possible to preview the new possibilities. At the same time, the Demon King noticed how some of his sunlight statuses had deteriorated to F, and that made him too vulnerable. Also, Shin realized that he could not use entry-level dark magic. Apparently this ability was not obtained through evolution, but after becoming a D-rank magic power. Shin realized that his body and magic power were still at E rank, and if he added 2 points each, it would be possible to pump them up to D rank. In the end, the Demon King was even able to pump his magic power to even C rank and gained new abilities. It became possible to create controlled territories, use absorption, create subjects of the Blood Bowl, and use the powers of dark magic, such as imposing a dark veil on opponents. Satisfied with his development, Shin decided to finish with a check. One of the reasons why the Demon King distributed experience to the body and magic power was the status of humans, which was unexpectedly low. Judging from wise publications, he was at the 8th level with the rank of Cart E. And so Shin, using his experience points, greatly surpassed this daring hero. After that, the Demon King decided to arrange a test of his subjects, for it was necessary to test the abilities of the new members of his team. Most of all were interested in the ability of the giant bat, which reduced the number of points to create it. Until now, bats were created for 3 points, but after evolving into a vampire, only 2 points were required. This was not a bad figure, because the savings allowed the creation of additional subordinates. But still, the principle of price distribution was not quite clear to Shin Sedek, because it was difficult to understand the principles of raising and lowering the cost of creating monsters. And if one calculated the creation of monsters because of their strength, then a bat that was equal in strength to a kobold should have cost 10 points. Shin got very tired of complicated mathematical calculations and decided to have a practice battle between the bat and the kobold. The Demon King ordered his subordinates to fight, but reminded them not to kill each other. The giant bat immediately pounced on his opponent using the advantages of his wings. But the kobold's strength was in his excellent reactions and strong arms, thanks to which he was able to repel the bat's attack and grab his opponent by the wings. Both wards were quite equal in strength, and the Demon King decided not to continue the training battle. Shin ordered an immediate stop, for the wards had already managed to get seriously injured. It was of course obvious that the strength of these monsters alone is almost the same, and so the Demon King decided to hold a duel in a 2-on-2 format. In the end, with great difficulty, still won the kobolds because their ability to cooperate was much better. However, the fact that a giant bat for only 5 points fought perfectly against an opponent worth 10 points likely meant that before evolution, it was also worth 10 points. This was all thanks to the new look of the vampire race. It could be seen that the bats and subjects added during evolution had half as many creation points required. Next, Demon King Shin held a duel between an orc and a gull, resulting in a fairly assured victory for the gull. In the course of the fight, it became clear that the gull's attack was too one-sided, and Shin even allowed the orc to use his weapon. But even after being badly wounded, the gull did not relent, and so the Demon King stopped the fight. But it was too late. The gull had dealt a fatal blow to the orc, completely oblivious to the order of his master. Shin decided that he would never make the ghoul a member of his family, for he was too unpredictable. The next pair to battle were a werewolf and a dark elf girl. The original price of the dark elf was 50 points, but the werewolf was valued at 60 points, and perhaps its strength should in some way surpass that of the dark elf. Shin ordered the duel to begin, and has always reminded them not to kill each other. The dark elf girl started fighting more actively and immediately landed several powerful blows on the werewolf. The advantage in speed was obvious, and it was very noticeable. The werewolf could not hold back the dark elf's onslaught and did not have time to block all the blows and was eventually thrown to the ground. The dark elf rushed to finish his opponent, but the Demon King ordered to stop the fight in time. Next, the werewolf tried his hand against the kobold, but also did not show anything outstanding. In the third duel, the werewolf was able to defeat the goblin with great effort. Shin was surprised at how weak the werewolf of the beast race was. But it turned out that the werewolf's real strength was in the light of the moon, so there was no point in relying on its abilities until then. But how a werewolf could be useful in a dungeon if it needed moonlight was unclear. After searching the settings of his territory, Shin found an enhancement called Moonlight Night, but unfortunately the price was too high and he had to spend 1,000 points. Shin decided not to think about it since he only had 275 points. And now, in order to test the Blood Bowl and contractability, one had to wait for the full recovery of points. Therefore, the Demon King decided to go about testing the absorption ability. Hidden in the absorption ability was Shin's great enhancement potential. And depending on how this ability worked, the Demon King could get ahead of all his opponents. It was to obtain this ability that Shin allocated experience points to body enhancement and magic power. The way to activate the absorption ability was very simple. Any opponent's ability was absorbed by directly sucking their blood. Shin liked this prospect because he could become much stronger just by absorbing the opponent's powers without having to do any improvements. To test his new ability, the Demon King decided to use his subjects and chose the one whose blood he would suck. Shin didn't really want to bite anyone because it was disgusting and unpleasant. And the mere thought of bathing, for example, made the goblin immediately feel nauseous. The only one suitable for this test was a girl dark elf. After all, compared to the rest of the subordinates, she was at least pleasant in appearance. In the end, Shin decided and started the absorption test. To the surprise of the Demon King, he felt the pleasant taste of the tender body of the dark elf, and the absorption process no longer seemed so disgusting. After a few minutes, the dark elf suddenly asked to stop, and the most surprising thing was that she began to speak in human language. Surprised, Shin asked if the elf was beginning to understand him. The girl replied that she understood everything perfectly well, and now the master's language was available to her. Shin did not understand at all how it happened that the dark elfess had gained the ability to speak a normal language. The girl explained that as soon as the Demon King tasted her blood, she immediately felt new sensations and gradually realized that she could speak differently. The girl was visibly embarrassed by such intimacy with the Demon King and apologized for her unpalatable body. But Shin asked the elven girl not to worry as he did not consider her body and blood unpalatable at all. Shin was surprised to find that he understood the elven language perfectly, and now he could understand the other dark elves as well. The Demon King had the idea to use the absorption on other subordinates to learn different languages as well. Shin next decided to absorb a werewolf. The werewolf became very confused from its proximity to its creator and immediately began to speak in the human language. and Shin felt the new knowledge of the werewolf's language. The Demon King felt the werewolf start to hug him harder and pushed his subordinate away. Shin thought that this was a mistake and should have waited until he could create a female werewolf. Suddenly, Shin noticed that after the absorption, the abilities he had received from the Dark Elf were completely gone. This was an unpleasant discovery, and the Demon King asked if the elves understood him now. But only the annoying werewolf answered, thus causing even more annoyance. Shin tried to talk to the Dark Elf, but she again did not understand anything and answered in an incomprehensible language. The Demon King realized that probably all the abilities gained after another absorption were overwritten and not retained. The girl organizer immediately joked and asked how on earth Shin dared to lay his hands on not only a girl elf, but also a male werewolf. The Demon King himself was not happy about such a success and asked not to make dirty hints. But the lady organizer did not stop to joke and said that the absence of a girl was no reason at all to be so unselective in relationships. The organizer asked what the subjects tasted like in general. Shin grudgingly replied that the taste was not the worst part, for it left a disgusting sensation after ingestion. Absorbing a slime gave slime telepathy. Rat and wolves also imparted the telepathy skill. The black wolf greatly increased leadership, and bats allowed the use of ultrasonic waves. Goblins, orcs, and kobolds after absorption allowed one to understand their languages and transferred their skill with various weapons. Shin explained that through the skill of telepathy, he could understand other people's feelings at the level of his own. And the absorbed skill made him a true master of weapons. The girl organizer asked what ability was passed down from the ghoul, but Shin never ventured to bite that vile creature and find out what it could reward him with. While Shin was experimenting with absorbing his subordinates, another Demon King decided to create a new family member for herself. The girl chose a goblin named Gobida for this role and applied the ability Trust. The whole process didn't last long and ended in success. The joyful goblin felt much closer to his mistress, and the Demon King herself decided to entrust her new relative with an important mission with the core of the territory. The goblin Gobida was in a hurry to escape, for his Demon King's territory had been attacked by the men of order. The girl herself relied on her subordinate, for he had her life in his hands along with a message. Shin finished with the study of absorption, still decided that now it was time for the main event, and gathered to create a blood bowl. After activating the ability in the hands of the Demon King, a bright blob of energy appeared, which was to become the magic bowl. During the creation process, the Demon King felt his life energy flowing out of his hands, and after a few minutes, a bloody bowl was created that was indeed filled with blood. Shin noticed how closely the beautiful elven woman was watching him. The Demon King regretted that they couldn't communicate and apologized for his foolishness. But the Elfess understood exactly how Shin felt. The Demon King decided to use the blood bowl specifically on the dark elfin girl and asked the girl to get ready. Shin handed the blood bowl to the girl and tried to use the contract ability for the first time and eagerly waited for the result. The dark elf girl was only illuminated by the magical light for a few seconds, and that was the end of the contract process. Shin was surprised at such a simple method, because at first glance, nothing much had changed. The dark elfess already in human language addressed the Demon King and asked for her true name. Shin was surprised by such a request and did not even know how exactly to respond. The dark elf was delighted with her success, for she was an ordinary subordinate, and now she was a member of the Demon King's family, and that was why she wanted to get a true name. The elven girl sincerely wished to bring her master maximum benefit and be special. Shin thought that perhaps it was a mandatory rule to give a subordinate a name after a contract and thought about the options. After not much thought, the Demon King suggested naming the girl Chloe. The dark elfess rejoiced and exclaimed that she would now be called Chloe Xian. The enthusiastic elven girl vowed to devote her entire life to serving her master and to do all his bidding. Shin was pleased with this outcome and thanked Chloe for her fine spirit and thought that the girl had become too talkative lately. The dark elf immediately asked what she could be of use, and it was noticeable how eager Chloe was to fulfill some order. Shin had meanwhile learned that his family members were free to leave his territory. However, it would be impossible to force Chloe to fight alone. Shin didn't know what to ask the girl and ordered Chloe to just be by his side. The Demon King wondered if all the family members were becoming so loyal and eager to do something. Shin thought that anything could be done in the future with enough points, but at this moment, precious points couldn't be wasted. After that, the Demon King decided to hold a war meeting since he needed to prepare for the attack of the Order heroes. After holding the war meeting, Shin contracted the Blood Bowl to a few more subjects and increased the number of family members. Also, Shin accepted for the sake of earning additional experience to send family members outside his territory. The Elf Chloe, the Werewolf Hope, the Goblin Blue, and the Kobold Knight Silver went on the quest. The Demon King ordered the squad to attack a neighboring territory and asked them to attack the Men of Order and the subjects of another Demon King. Shin advised them to be careful and asked them not to die in this campaign. The Demon King sincerely did not want to lose his family members. After all, a lot of points had been spent on creating contracts. Shin also found out that all of his family members could now calmly communicate in Japanese. In addition to this, Shin could now understand the intentions of his subjects, and this ability only worked one way. While the squad was on the short demon campaign was able to accumulate 300 points. Shin asked Chloe what she thought would be the best thing to do with the available points. Add another family member or still create some weapons. Beelfes replied that she would support whatever her master decided, but it was Chloe's opinion that Shin wanted to know. The Dark Elfess explained that a simple girl like her could not give her opinion and influence her lord's decision. Shin realized that after gaining the ability to understand the intentions of his subjects through absorption, it became clear that all of his subordinates were absolute sycophants, and it was very difficult to have a normal dialogue with them. Because of this, it felt like something important was missing from the relationship. Shin promised to personally decide how to proceed, and this made the elf Chloe very happy. In fact, the Demon King had already decided to act a little luxurious and wanted to make some good weapons for himself. Shin chose to craft a rank B mithril spear for himself for the available 300 creation points. The spear was an excellent weapon and was much lighter than it looked. The weapon was also very handy, and now all that was left was to get a good workout with the new spear. Shin also noticed that his territory had been attacked much less frequently recently compared to the previous months. Shin decided that it was due to his inattention. It so happened that when squaring off with his family's challenges during dungeon forays, people were sometimes attacked. There were also frequent skirmishes with those heroes who were waiting for their turn to attack Shin's territory, and so many teams were forced to retreat. However, of course, there were also those people who did not turn down the opportunity to try their luck in Shin's territory. The most active were the heroes who had good equipment, and gradually the attacks on the second floor began to increase. Shin decided that such opponents would be a great target to test new capabilities. The Demon King decided to try using the Dark Veil first and see how effective it was. Shin carefully observed the terrified guests of his dungeon and decided to supplement the attack with ultrasonic bat waves to finally break the hero's squad. The Men of Order really did not expect such an attack and began to panic. Just at this moment, the Dark Elves also entered the battle. The Kobold Knights also attacked from the rear and forced the opponents to make a hasty retreat. The Demon King was waiting for this moment, and as soon as the Men of Order turned their backs on him, Shin attacked with dark arrows and doomed some of the invaders. The surviving leader of the Order team angrily asked who Shin even was. But the Demon King explained that they are the dungeon master who likes to chase away insolent humans. The hero of Order tried to explain that they just wanted to gain some experience and weren't going to lose their friends. Shin, on the other hand, enjoyed the fear of his opponents and claimed his right to do whatever he wanted on his territory. One of the guys started begging not to kill their squad and asked Shin to force the monster ghoul not to hurt them. But the Demon King pretended that he did not hear the suffering of his enemies and only once again reminded them of his high position. Eventually, Shin waited until the enemies were completely surrounded and gave the order to destroy the entire detachment of Order, and the subjects instantly began to move. A quick fight left no chance for the Men of Order, and in the end, there was only one guy with a sword left on his feet. The young hero roared with anger and sincerely wished for the death of the Demon King. Shin enjoyed his triumph and declared that if the guy killed him, all the monsters would immediately disappear, although no one really knew that. The hero swordsman soberly assessed his chances and replied that it wasn't realistic, but Shin nobly offered a one-on-one fight. The Order hero incredulously asked if the Demon King would really let him fight for his life honestly. Shin replied that it would be just that, and it was the Dungeon Master's wish. The fellow swordsman desperately rushed into the attack, hoping to avenge his fallen friends. The Demon King was prepared for such a daring attack and thoughtfully put his mithril spear forward. At the same time, Shin noticed that his opponent was holding a good F-rank leather shield. He wondered how his rank B weapon would be able to deal with such a defense. The superiority of the spear was amazing, and it only took one strike to pierce through the leather shield, which did not help its owner at all. The dying hero of the Order had time to marvel at the incredible strength of the Demon King. And Shin sadly said that such a weak opponent was not even good for training. A few hours later, a new group of heroes decided to invade the Demon King's domain. Shin watched with interest as 7 second-level fighters and 5 first-level fighters tried to gain experience in his dungeon. Shin decided not to deviate from his usual tactics and gradually force his opponents to retreat. But suddenly a new invasion message arrived on his smartphone, and it caused the Demon King to be surprised. It turned out to be somehow incredible that the 13th hero of the Order had entered Shin's territory, even without looking at the restriction. The new character spectacularly burst into the dungeon and very quickly started running into the deepest part of Shin's territory. Chloe became a special elf, and now she perfectly understood her purpose. The meaning of the girl's life became the destruction of the enemies of her creator and fulfillment of shows. Shin became for Chloe an outstanding person from whom she was delighted. Chloe admired her master and felt the warmest feelings for the man. The girl was always attentive to her master's wise words and tried always to memorize them. Chloe never forgot the moment when Shin sank his fangs into her and then made her a member of his family. Each time, Chloe couldn't contain her emotions when she remembered her favorite creator. Her partners only joked at such moments and observed the old behavior of the pixie. Chloe sometimes took offense at the jokes and told her partners that there was nothing strange about loving their creator, for they were all members of his family. Chloe wasn't particularly fond of the Goblin Blue, whom she would have gladly killed if it weren't for the restrictions. Cobalt Silver was slightly less annoying to the elf, and she appreciated his fighting skills. The Werewolf Hope seemed completely useless to Chloe as a member of the team, since he could only fight normally by moonlight. The elfess thought that Shin was only wasting her time training Hope, for if she was there, why would she need such a weakling? Shin's squad cautiously surveyed the area, and Blue noticed a goblin squad of 10 units ahead. Blue immediately offered to attack. But Shin, by means of mental communication, ordered everyone to hide, and he would be in command. Shin decided to use Chloe's magic attack first, and the fireball was the perfect solution for a surprise attack. After that, Silver drew attention away from himself and even managed to introduce himself, which looked very silly. Then Blue should enter the battle and make the opponents panic with a surprise attack. Everything went strictly according to plan. Chloe promised to fight next time without sparing anyone, but Blue asked not to burn the enemies, because then there would be no trophies. The elfess resented it, and the goblin found some food. Chloe was surprised that even such simple goblins have food with them, and they have nothing and have to beg. Hope reminded them that they had the best weapons, and that was far more important. But Chloe disagreed and said that it was very difficult to travel without food. Shin heard his subordinates arguing, but didn't pay too much attention to it. The Demon King didn't want to spend extra points to feed the team at all, and believed that food could be found on the road. Shin preferred to be a rationalist in such matters. After the battle, Shin ordered his group of cronies to survey the monster races around his territory and gather as much information as possible. Chloe decided that she would definitely do whatever it took for her creator to take over the world. The 13th invasion turned out not to be human at all, and Shin speculated that perhaps it was a subordinate of another Demon King. For some monsters could leave their territory. This situation was fair enough, because Shin's family members had also left to earn experience in another territory, and apparently he wasn't the only one who was resourceful. But it was strange that he was attacked by just one exhausted goblin who was unlikely to succeed. Shin decided to find out the true purpose of this lone goblin and began to observe him. Seeing no danger in him, the Demon King decided to capture the goblin and interrogate him. Shin ordered his subordinates not to kill the goblin and to deal with other invaders. Gobita was frightened, but all determined to fulfill his mistress's errand. On the day the world was on the brink of destruction, 16-year-old schoolgirl Sonosaki Kanon was walking to school. Everything was quiet around her, and along the way she only met other girls who were discussing their plans after the end of the semester. The schoolgirls were discussing boyfriends and the upcoming summer festival, but Kanon didn't really get into the general trends. Kanon thought all this chatter was a waste of time because the same phrases were repeated every day. Some students discussed their future and where they would go after school. But Kanon did not pay attention to these conversations either. The girl did not particularly like to socialize and already with a standard phrase asked to vacate her seat in the classroom. Classmates only laughed at Kanon, but she did not care. Kanon had felt difficulties in socializing since childhood and was already used to loneliness. The girl considered people as cruel creatures and realized how people talked about her behind her back. Therefore, Kanon tried to isolate herself and immersed herself in reading, because books gave her new life and new emotions. Everything went on as usual, and Kanon did not think about anything until she received a strange message about the World Salvation Project, and it changed her whole life. Kanon became interested in a test with many questions, but could not find any detailed instructions. Kanon loved reading instructions in textbooks to learn new things, even despite hurtful words from other girls. But then it was as if Kanon woke up and realized that there was a lot she didn't remember and didn't even understand who she was. The girl was familiarized with her new role in the project of world salvation and did not really understand, because it all seemed to her not too detailed instructions. One thing was clear, now she must deal with her territory and the creation of subjects. Kanon tried to find more information and noticed a limited offer that offered a free answer to one question. It had been a long time since that day, and now Kanon was counting the hours since Gobita had left to fulfill her request. Kanon felt that she was now on the verge of life and death, and it was frightening. The girl nostalgically recalled the time with her subordinates who had protected her. Kanon was surrounded by monsters who loved her and whom other people considered enemies. But in them Kanon found true friends and was glad of such company. But the quiet time did not last long, and soon her territory was attacked by cruel humans. The monsters immediately rushed to defend their queen. During the battle, all the goblins were brutally slaughtered by the invaders. The favorite wolf, which Kanon liked to treat with dried meat, also could not survive the terrible battle. The girl was horrified and angry at the unjust world. Afterwards, Kanon realized that she had become a villain who condemned everyone to death and asked forgiveness from the dead monsters. Kanon then began to observe her opponents to decide how to proceed. Kairi warned Wai together and asked her not to let her guard down, for no matter how the opponent looked, she was still a demon king. Wai was confident and reminded that the monsters in this place were weak and the traps were also all predictable, and so there was no need to worry about the local demon king. The head of the group, the guy with glasses, agreed with this opinion, because usually in such cases, they had already been attacked by the master of the territory himself. Kairi suggested that the girl demon king most likely does not prioritize battles and develop knowledge, and therefore does not attack. Kanon realized that the heroes of the order had absolutely figured out everything about her, and that was too bad. Kanon really didn't place too much importance on strength from the beginning during the experience point allocation and got carried away with knowledge. As time has shown, this was a mistake, and as a result Kanon was unable to defend her territory and her monsters, and now she herself was on the verge of death. At the same time, Kanon, because she pulled out her Zukuriate, could not create weapons like other demon kings. Meanwhile, the purification squad was already scouring the area in search of the main core. Sid, the head of the squad, recalled the last time they found the core in a washing machine and suggested searching the abandoned castle. Wei, on the other hand, suggested just catching the demon queen and interrogating her. But Sid decided that looking for the enemy in the forest would be very difficult. Sil and Wei began to argue and completely failed to notice Kanon, who was very close by and hiding in a tree. The girl thought that now perhaps she would be saved. Kanon knew perfectly well that the destruction of her Zukuriate and the clearing of the territory would inevitably lead to her death. This whole world did not look fair to Kanon, and she realized that there was no other way for demon kings to strengthen themselves except by defeating their enemies. But Kanon could not resist the men of order who were growing stronger every day. Kanon felt fear and did not want to die. The girl remembered the organizer, who advised not to hesitate and destroy the invaders, because only in this way you can achieve freedom. Meanwhile, Shin was going to interrogate the captured goblin, because it was very curious to know the purpose of his appearance. The Demon King asked if the goblin had entered his territory by mistake, but Gobita confidently replied that it was not at all. Gobita explained that he had come at the request of his queen and was to deliver a message and a package. Shin was surprised and decided to read the strange letter as soon as possible. The letter turned out to be from an unknown demon king named Kanon. It was stated that her territory was nearby, and so she decided to make a request. Kanon explained that she was ready to announce her surrender, but since she could not say it in person, she sent her subordinate Gobut. At the same time, the girl asked not to kill the goblin, as he was a close friend of hers. Shin noted the author's beautiful handwriting and good manners. Shin knew that according to the rules, only a demon king can surrender to another demon king. And after that, the demon king who accepted the surrender gets the territory of the loser. Kanon offered her territory and herself as a subject. The girl promised to provide important information about the World Salvation Project since she possessed B-rank knowledge. Shin decided that this was an excellent offer. Kanon also decided to point out the disadvantages of such a deal in the letter, for it was to add more credibility. Kanon explained that if Shin got the foreign territory, his limit of chaos points would increase by 100, but only 50 would be added in the surrender process. Kanon also pointed out that she had very little time and, if she agreed, asked her to call. Shin realized that Kanon was in danger and so decided to surrender in order to survive, and now an important choice must be made. Shin liked the letter and how everything was written in detail, but he knew absolutely nothing about the surrender. There were still some doubts, but in the end Shin decided that there was no point in deception, and so this girl just wanted to survive. Shin once again evaluated all the pros and cons and realized that there were actually no cons at all, and it would be the right decision to accept the surrender. Gobita suddenly started talking and asked to save his queen as she deserves to live on. Shin was surprised by this behavior of his captive and asked why Gobita was so eager to save his leader. The goblin explained that it was normal, for he loved and respected his queen. Shin asked if the goblin was only grateful for his creation, and that's it. Gobita eventually admitted that Kanon is very kind and strong, wise and caring, and he wants to do anything to save her. Shin believed in the goblin's sincerity, though he didn't really understand the meaning of his words, for if Kanon is strong, wise, and generally perfect, then why would she capitulate? Gobita began to tell that the people who attacked them were very strong and Kanon simply did not have the strength to defend her territory. Shin was glad to have a normal conversation rather than hear another sycophant saying what they wanted to hear. Then Gobita decided to show the core of the territory for the sake of convincing, and it was a real confirmation of Kanon's intentions.